What's up, good people? Peace, peace, peace. Be sure to like and share the live. Like and share the live, people. How we doing, good people? We're going to briefly have a discussion real quick. Peace, peace, peace. Where's everybody at? Y'all drop your locations in the comments. Where's everybody at? How we doing today? I'm doing pretty good. Can't complain at all. I just wanted to briefly hop on here. Just kind of have a little brief conversation. We're going to talk about the higher and the lower self for a minute. Just very briefly for a minute. Right? Very briefly. You know, we've been extensively talking about, being seen, what comes with being seen, what that may activate within the self. And we're going to continue that conversation a bit deeper. All right. In North Carolina, I see you, Coop Davy. Okay, North Carolina. I was born and raised in North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina. So, peace. Okay, Washington, D.C. Okay. How you doing, Charlie? Peace. How y'all doing? I want to thank all of y'all for hopping in. So we're just going to very briefly, real quick, we're going to talk about the two selves that's fighting inside of you, right? I want to sit this down a bit. Okay, so do this. Okay, Connecticut. Peace to you, Mrs. Lockhart 777 in Connecticut. All right, so what I'm referring to when I say the higher and lower self, we're talking about an identity split. We're talking about an internal tug of war. All right. Okay. Peace, Elemental Wear from West Virginia. I appreciate you following me for over a year now. Protect DMV. I appreciate it. So yeah, we're talking about the two cells that's fighting inside of you. Now, when you feel the two cells fighting inside of you are battling within you, oftentimes we might feel like that's indecision, but it's not indecision. It's not confusion. It's not weakness. What's really happening is it's an alchemical war that is happening. It's the oldest spiritual conflict that's been written into every mystery and religious tradition that there is. The two cells represents the two states of consciousness, right? So there's different ways that we can look at that in terms of, terminology, verbiage, and how people use that. So when we say two states of consciousness, you can look at that like two timelines, two identities trying to occupy the same vessel. So let's break that down a bit and let's see what we mean and how that is connected to being seen, right? So when we say the lower self and the higher self, a lot of times when people use those words specifically, they coming from a hermetic perspective. We talking about hermeticism. We talking about hermetic teachings. We talking about the self being split between. Okay. I ain't gonna be on long. We talking about the self being split between the lower self, the higher self. Well, what's the difference between the two? When we say the lower self, we're talking about the part of us that's driven by fear, the part of us, that's driven by survival, that's caught in the past. When you're talking about the higher self, you're talking about the part that's driven by purpose. You're talking about expansion. You're talking about the future. So when you try to step into a bigger identity, being seen, right, or visibility, leadership, expression, all those things come into play, right? And what's happening is when you step into those bigger roles, you are threatening the lower self's entire survival structure, or the nature of your lower self, or the ego. A lot of times we tend to just refer to it as the ego self, because it is the ego that attaches to those identities, that will do any and everything to protect those identities, right? But when one evolves, or when one connects with the higher self, we understand, we know I am is the ultimate principle, right? So when you're threatening that lower self's entire survival structure, it will resist. So you deal with resistance, right? And this resistance can show up as procrastination. It can be overthinking. It can be perfectionism. Or, oh, no, it's not ready yet. We can hide behind that, not realizing that's what we're doing, but we can. It can show up as self-doubt. It can show up as shrinking. And it's not sabotage. It's just the lower self feeling like, or thinking, if I evolve, I die. Okay? That's the ego. So when you go through ego deaths, this is what's happening when you go through an ego death. Right? You're doing away with the illusions of what you have falsely identified as the self, right? So the higher self, on the other hand, is saying, if we don't evolve, then we will never live. So your lower self is, if I evolve, I die. Then notice the words, if I evolve, I die. The higher self is, well, if we don't evolve, then we will never live. So there's that internal struggle. There's that war between the self that's dealing in the two opposite spectrums. And all this knowledge, this knowledge of self, self-mastery, doing your shadow work, is just bringing those two parts into reconciliation, bringing them together, meeting somewhere within the middle, so to speak. That's the holy union. That's the holy marriage, or the sacred marriage, right? So that's truly what that means, and what that represents. The union of the higher and the lower self. This was symbolized in the Bible, biblically, when Jesus rode in on the donkey. So the donkey was symbolic of the lower self, of mastering, of conquering of the lower self. This was the very purpose of why it's worded that way. Nothing is said the way that it's said just because. There is a symbolic layer to it. So think about it like, there's the literal version and there's the symbolic version. So the symbolic version is always going to give you more to the story. It's always going to layer that story out for you more. The literal version is just the simplistic, version when your mind is simple, right? So it's like a children's version. But when you get into the metaphysics and you really get into the symbolism and the meaning behind the things that's used, the things that's said, because nothing is said by accident. So when you get into that, you realize there's so much more to the story, right? So, and then there's when you're doing shadow work, you might come across this concept as the false self versus the true self. It's just another way of saying the same thing. It's just another way of saying higher and lower self. I feel you, Protect DMV. We're not really talking about Christianity or religion in any sense of the word. I'm just simply using that as a reference of what that symbolism means in that particular story. But we're not going to get into that, because that ain't what we're talking about, right? So the false self, the true self, is the shadow work way of wording the same shit. So when you say the false self, it's the identity that you have built to survive. Again, it goes back to the ego. Right? So that's if you've always identified as being the good child, right? Or the quiet one, the strong one. Oh shit, that's the strong friend. Or you the smart one in the family. Or, being the caretaker, or even if it's being the invisible one, right? But it's the version of you that kept you safe, right? When you were in your most vulnerable position. So it kept you safe, it kept you accepted, and it kept you, it allowed you to be tolerated. But your true self is the one that you had to bury so that you can survive this environment, right? So that's really the expressive you. That's the intuitive you. That's the visionary you. That's the truth telling you, right? So when they clash, it feels like part of me want this, but part of me is still really scared to really go after that. It's like I know what I need to do, but I can't make myself do it. So whenever you feeling in that state, Your two selves are at war with each other. This is what's happening, right? It's identity friction. So the false self fears that if the true self rises, everything that kept you safe will fall apart. Now, symbolically speaking, this is the same thing that you see in light versus dark, in good versus evil. This is always the same reiteration of this very same inner war that's always happening, that's always ongoing, that's always going to be there, because this is what it represents. So the bad, or your shadow, or your dark, is the part of you that's clinging onto this identity and don't want to let go. But that higher self, or that higher version of you, know, look, we're not going to progress unless we do let go of this thing, unless we remove ourselves, unless we can move forward, right? So it's always, in a sense, if we symbolically looking at it, it's like the God and the devil trying to keep from one up. That's why it's always a constant back and forth. That's why that battle will never truly end, because it's not truly really meant to, because that's the nature of our inner world. So another way that we can look at that is, now, if you actually get into a cult, they're going to outright tell you this is the ego self and the soul self. So and even in that, they also talk about that in Kabbalah. If you study Kabbalah, in Kabbalah, the ego is pronounced, or is said, what's the way you say that word? It's the nefesh, right? But it's basically the animal soul, which is wired for protection, it's wired for repetition. But then you have the soul, which is the divine spark that is tied to your purpose, right? So the ego wants the routine, it wants sameness, it wants familiarity, predictability. The soul wants expansion, it wants transformation, it wants experience, it wants depth, it wants truth. So when your soul says, let's ride, your ego is responding to rising to what? Because we've never been there before. I don't know what's going to happen if we do that. That seems dangerous. Therefore, that is a threat. So that part of you is going to resist. Now, if you really want to be real, and you really want to be technical, and you really want to get into the gist of the occult, that's why it's portrayed the way it's portrayed. This is why when you hear me say, well, the soul is always going to be shown as the dark, because the conscious self is always going to be trying to prevent that from rising up. And it's going to look and appear terrifying, because it is trying to go into an unknown that the conscious self does not know. The conscious self is afraid of. So if it's afraid to go into that unknown space, that's the scariest shit you ever gonna see. It's gonna be represented by the monster. So your monster itself, symbolically, is always gonna be the monster in the story. I know it's backwards, but it's done that way purposely, so that way that you can stay down here and you don't rise up in your power. That's the point of it all, right? So if you into quantum mechanics, if you like the quantum verbiage or quantum occultism, then you look at it like the old timeline self versus the new timeline self, right? So when you look at it like that, it's like, because every time you step into a new identity, whether it's entrepreneur, a creator, a healer, a content creator, a speaker, a leader, you shift timelines, right? So the old timeline self is going to be coded with survival. It's going to be coded with suppression, invisibility, self-protection, fear-based decision. But that new timeline self is going to be coded with being seen, autonomy, sovereignty, authority, intuition, embodiment. But when these two overlap, you're going to feel blocked. You're going to feel like you can't move. You're going to feel stuck. You're going to feel drained. You're going to feel confused, because you split. You understand? Because you split. Your energy is splitting off in two different directions. So think about it. If it's a source of power, right? And if you got to split the source, then you're not going to get the maximum amount of source. You split in the source. Okay? So, but if you can get it in unison, then you're going to have more connection to source. You're going to have more energy. You feel what I'm saying? You're going to have more power. Because when you're looking at it like this, understand you're in between worlds. So symbolically, when you see, especially, this is why I like to use media. Media for me really helps me to get these concepts off. But when you see people in that in-between space, they're not quite dead, not quite alive, just in this space, that's what that space represents. It's a liminal space. It's like an in-between space. It's like you in between worlds, because one part of the self is trying to die, the ego self, and one part of the self is trying to be born. So you're at the crossroads. That's what the crossroads represent. When you see crossroads, that's what they represent. Now, I know they want to tell you, when you see crossroads, you know, this whole concept of crossroad demons and all that shit. Listen, it's you. It ain't nobody but you. Ain't nothing ever stopping you but you. It's always you. It's that version of you putting up that resistance, creating that friction, right? So if you want to be psychological, we could say the shadow self and the express self. Okay, so if you're familiar with Carl Jung and psychology, then that's the same way you verb. Now, if you've been paying attention, or if you've been watching the whole time, I've said this in 5 different ways. This is 5 different ways. This verbiage is talking about the same thing, because a lot of times we be bumping heads because we don't realize we talking about the same thing using different verbiage. We're talking about the same concept a lot of times. So I like to make connections. I like to bring all this shit together because I feel like that's the best way to really understand all this shit, is to put it all together, right? So your shadow self and your express self. So the shadow self is going to hold everything you suppress. Everything you don't want nobody to know about you, everything that you keep down. It can be your voice. It can be your anger. It can be your brilliance. It can be your creativity. It can be your desires, your boundaries. It can even be your power. You very well can suppress your power. And you might be thinking, damn, why would I suppress my power? And it's because before you knew any better, before you even understood really language, you was taught, or you was in an environment that didn't allow you to be able to express that power. And in order for you to be accepted and to be okay in that environment, you had to suppress it. So that's what you learn very early on before you learn a lot of other things. So the reason why you got to do shadow work is because a lot of your good is in that shadow. You don't suppress just bad shit. You don't just suppress that. You suppress what wasn't tolerated in your environment. And we don't always come up in good environments or great environments, because we are raised by people who have their own issues, their own traumas that they inflict on you. Because when you don't do no shadow work, when you don't do no inner work, when you don't deal with your demons gonna raise your kids. And so therefore that means you just passing that same shit on down to that generation. And it's gonna keep getting passed down until somebody is able to be aware enough to see it and to break the cycle. So when people say your ancestors been waiting for you for generations, that's what it means. Because for a long time, they didn't have the capacity to be able to deal with said pattern. All they did was hand it down. They couldn't do the work. So what they don't do is passed on for the next one to do. That's just how it goes, unfortunately, right? If that's the case of it. So when you suppress these things long enough, the shadow becomes an internal opponent. You see what I'm saying? It's like literally turning part of yourself against you, because the shadow self wants safety. It just wants to be safe. It just want to feel safe. It just wants to be in a position where it feels like it's okay. But the express self wants the freedom. The shadow self want to be safe and want to feel okay. The express self want freedom. The shadow self want control. So the war between these two selves creates psychic tension. And it forces transformation. It's the internal apocalypse that leads to rebirth. You see how all these things outer that they teach you spiritually also has a means for your inner world. You get what I'm saying? So when we really break it down and get to the real meat of it, right? When you really do your work, you really come to the truth of there really isn't two selves. There's not two selves. There's only one self in 2 stages. Okay? Follow me. It's one self in 2 stages, because here's the truth of it. You don't actually have 2 selves. You have the self that was shaped by your wounds, and then you have the self that is shaped by your becoming. Right? So the former self is dissolving and the latter is emerging. So there is a space in between there where you're not quite who you used to be, but you're also not quite who you are becoming. This is that imposter syndrome. This is when you feel like an imposter, but you're supposed to, because that's the space you in. That's the state that you in. So it's not a bad thing in that instance. It's really an indication that you are doing the work. Because the fight is the friction of identity shedding. Because all you're doing is getting rid of all the things that are not you. Doing this work is nothing but unlearning You're getting rid of all the shit that you took on that you thought was you because you had to cope with being who you were in your environment. But that really might not be who you are. So it's like you got to deal with a lot of shit before you're able to even really understand, to get to a point where you're old enough to be able to go back and claim that power and claim that authority and correct all that shit from before. It sounds like a lot, but that's basically what it is. Your soul is shedding its old shell. So it's like the serpent outgrowing the skin. This is the symbolic and this is the power in understanding the snake, and why we always saw the snake as the great ancestor, and why we never had a means of being or viewing the snake as evil. That shit comes from religion. That's why they give it to you in religion, because they don't want you to do that. Because they want you to stay at the lowest level possible so that you can be controlled. That's the whole point. Because the more spiritually aware and awakened you become, the more autonomy you claim. The more you take your own self. A lot of people like to have the sovereignty conversation, but don't do no spiritual work. That's the true way to be sovereign. You can't do it halfway. If you're going to do it legally, you got to do it spiritually as well. You have to understand what that shit means spiritually. So when people talk about the two selves and sovereignty, oh, there's a strong man, there's the real you. Understand the correlation and how that shit is also spiritual. Because your strong man is this false sense of self, who you think you are. And the true you ain't that. The true me is not Rakia. I identify as Rakia or as Cosmic Paradox, but that's not the true me. You understand what I'm saying? This is just who I am right now in this life, but that's not the true me. That's not my soul. My soul is much more than that. You get what I'm saying? Because you're not a body with a soul. You are a soul that's occupying a body. So there is a difference. You get me? So it's the same thing of the symbolism of the phoenix burning before it rises again, right? Conflict is not dysfunction. It's not dysfunction. It's alchemical combustion. So the more your ass is at war with yourself, understand the more alchemical work that's going on within you. The war is the work. That is the work. So when you're talking about two selves, right? The two selves fighting inside of you, that's your old identity being dismantled, right? That's why you feeling the way you feeling. That's why it almost feels like a sense of sadness or heaviness that you can't explain. And it's because you're grieving your old self. You're grieving who you used to be. So all the things that you used to be able to do because you didn't know no better, you can't do that anymore. So that's the thing with visibility, with power, with learning your power, because you can't go backwards and you can't act like you don't know no more. You can't go backwards and want to hide no more. You can't do that no more. So once you in there, you in there. So for a lot of people, this is why they don't. This is why ignorance is bliss. This is why more people are asleep. And you got to let them sleep. Let them sleep well. Hey, rest in peace. Let them sleep. Because it's not for everybody to be awake when you are awake. That's another means of being distracted and feeling like you got to wake the word up, because you don't. You don't. You feel me? So your old identity is being dismantled. Your ego is resisting death. Okay? And for some of y'all, I'm going to tell you, the bigger your soul is, the bigger your spirit is, the bigger your damn ego is. So it feels like you fighting for your life. Because you are fighting for your life. Because like I said, your soul is insisting on evolving. See, this is why the soul be depicted as bad and it's seen as the darkness. Because it's going to conjure up shit that's going to destroy what you got going on based on that false ass identity. It's a false identity. That's why it's being destroyed. That's why it is breaking down. You got to deal with what is real. You caught up in too much illusion. And that's the point. So you got to get out of lying to yourself. You feel what I'm saying? So remember, when you're going through that, it's kind of like your aura is recalibrating. And the internal war is not a sign that something is wrong. It's really a sign that you're going through a transformation. If you was just oblivious and just like everything is good and everything is okay, that's really the red flag. Motherfuckers run around here like everything all good and cozy. That's the red flag. Because really, man, this shit hell out here when your eyes are really open and you really know what's going on. So in that sense, that's the sense of the two selves. And then, there's the protector identity, and then there's your future identity. You know, that's dealing with specifically when it comes to the visibility, when it comes to being seen, because every person that is trying to grow runs into this same conflict. And that conflict is not between good and bad. It's not between discipline and lazy, but it's between the protector identity and that future identity. Because your old self is just still trying to protect you. All right. So that future version of you is the one that is emerging. But you still have the you that was built from survival. And it's hard to get out of that fighting from survival. You get what I'm saying? So I just wanted to kind of come on here real briefly to kind of give y'all that, because, you know, I'm trying to do lives more. Now, spiritually for me, I realize when I do a live, this is my means of offering to the public, to give of myself, because I don't like to do it. I realize that I don't really truly like to give of my real self. So when I do this in this instance, it's like an offering for me. It's like me doing something that I know spiritually I have to do, even though I'm really uncomfortable with doing it. You feel me? So, anybody got any questions? My bad, because I have not looked at these comments. I just kind of wanted to be laser focused so I wouldn't get all off topic. Now, for those of you who are on the Patreon, it's a lot of new stuff that's been added to the Patreon this week. So I want y'all to check that out. A lot of that is in reference to the visibility and being seen in terms of what I'm talking about. We went deep into the mask, and we went deep into talking about that. We talk about masking in terms of impersonality and identity fluidness. We're talking about alter egos, and we're talking about deities and how all of these things are connected. So if you are on the Patreon, then head to the Patreon so you can check those out. And there's also a lot of stuff up on the YouTube. So, you know, there's always a lot that's going along with what I'm talking about on any of those other channels. Now, for those of you who really feel like you are really struggling with being seen, especially if you are somebody that's trying to do something creatively or in a space that requires you to put yourself out there, right? And then being seen is really triggering some stuff for a lot of you, which is what I made the visibility code for. So get the visibility code. All right. Now, it's not a course. It's not a mindset thing. It's hard for me to really put into words what it is, because it's not those things. It's more like it's like a framework. It's like, damn, how can I explain this shit, man? It's like a red pill. It's like a means to help you to be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying? But what's up, Earth is a scam? What's going on with you? Peace. So, but I wanted to hop on here just to briefly have that little conversation with y'all. This was just kind of something I was working on, so I wanted to share it. Right, so I will save this live. I'm going to repost this, right? And I'm also going to put it on YouTube, but I'm going to put it here on the page. So if you caught the end of it, you can go back and catch it all. And, you know, if you got any questions, then you can hit me up in the DM. It might take me a minute to get back to you, but, you know, you can do that. So in the meantime, you know, before I wrap it up, we got any questions before I hop off? And I do have a Wonder Man breakdown coming soon. Kind of just giving it a few days. I don't like to do like reviews and stuff when stuff first comes out. I prefer not to do that. You know, gotta let it sit a little bit. But by Sunday, look for that Wonder Man breakdown. I'm gonna go into it a little deeper. So it's probably going to be on the YouTube, so be on the lookout for that. If you enjoy the decoding, if you like the breakdowns, be on the lookout for that. So, in the meantime, what's up with you, Fashawn? Peace, bro. It's been a minute. Hope you're doing well. I appreciate you. But I'm going to wrap it up, y'all. I appreciate y'all. Be sure to go back and look at this whole video if you're just now getting on. It's a lot of gems up in here, y'all. So, I appreciate y'all. Love y'all, man. Peace. Should you watch Wonder Man? I think so. Especially look, when it comes like with Wonder Man, it felt real coded. It felt very coded. because, and if you know, I don't know if you know, but, comic book wise, he not black in the comic, right? But I think it was perfect that he black in this and in the way that they made him. Like, he just real coded, He's coded. And I'm going to say this before I get off, right? Like, when it comes to the superhero type of thing, it's some of the most powerful forms of media that's out there. But unfortunately, because comics is built on occult shit, and I'm going to break that down for y'all one day next week. We're going to get into that heavy. There is nothing but occult stories. But because they are like that, then that's why they're nerfed so bad. They nerf the shit out of Marvel. DC, not so much. That's why their movies don't do as well. But they nerf it. Like, they completely take a lot out of it. Like, I'm going to give you an example. Well, let me say this before I give you an example. Now, I said all that to say, us as melanated people, on a soul level, should really, really, really connect with them stories. Because we naturally always have to create another face. We always in society got to be two people. It's fucking natural for us to be two people. It's genetically, historically accurate for us to be two people. And this is what made me talk about being seen a lot. Because it's natural for us to struggle with being seen. It's natural for us to have visibility wounds. Because that shit was detrimental to our survival once upon a time. Consistently, generationally. So those wounds got handed down. And it's hard for us to be seen because being seen once upon a time would literally mean your life. It's more than just somebody picking at you. No, it could cost you your life. So us as people, melanated people, we should really, really, truly understand what it's like having to suppress or hide your true nature in order to survive or to make it within society. And that was like one of the most prominent things that spoke out to me when I watched Wonder Man. Because when we watch things, what we feel and what we see is filtered through our lens of our experience. So we're going to see shit based on our experience. They're just like Ironheart. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people didn't like Ironheart. I thought it was dope and it was perfect. Because what it really reiterated, at the root of it, you had a girl, a prodigy, a genius. She probably is smarter than Tony Stark. But she has no resources. So she resorts to crime or unethical decisions in order to survive. And that's our fucking story. We have to resort to a lot of things that's unethical, that may be criminal, in order to survive. So, mind you, she built a whole suit at a college, at MIT, right? But she couldn't keep it because she got kicked out of school because she had to make money. So she was selling papers because she couldn't afford nothing because she didn't have no resources. So to me, when I watched it, I saw more of that as the story versus it being the whole comic book shit. Because we get caught up in because that's why nobody want to really respect the comic stories. You take notice, they don't get no awards for it. They don't acknowledge that as real storytelling. There's a reason why they do that shit. They do the same thing to horror. And it's because you can put the most fucking spiritual truth in those type of stories. Not to say other stories don't have them, because really all stories have them. I don't care if it's a slapstick comedy. It's still a hidden message in a lot of those movies. But it's not a coincidence that very specifically when it comes to those stories, they get nerfed really bad. Or there's a very strong online audience that really drives specific narratives pertaining to those stories. So that's something, me personally, I really want to get into that very, very heavily because of what is revealed in them stories. But they don't want us to look at it like that. That's why if the first thing they did, they want you to think it was for nerds. So they wanted to make it uncool. They wanted to make it unpopular. You know what I'm saying? So they do a whole lot of different things to want to discredit them stories. But I'm telling you, I promise you, the most spiritual concept, complex concepts be in them fucking Marvel stories, be in them comic book stories. It's in those stories, yo. They are heavy. See, now I'm going to go back to the example, right? I'm going to go back to the example. The movie Thor, Love and Thunder. The movie Thor, Love and Thunder. I think we all can agree is probably one of the very lowest tiers of the MCU, of the Marvel movies. Is not a fucking coincidence because of what their story is about. See, when I look at movies and films and everything, I don't look at it like I'm just looking at it for the action or the drama or the comedy. I'm literally looking at the symbolism in the story, because the symbolism is telling a story. There's the plot and what's happening on the surface, and then the symbolism is telling you a whole nother story. And when you look at the symbolism of it, if they would have stuck to what that story was about and made it as dark as it would have been fucking phenomenal. But they didn't want to do that because that's not how Disney make their movies. Disney and Marvel, they take everything and make light of it. They make light of everything, which is okay. That's not bad. But some things you can't make light of, and you have to tell it like it is. So they nerfed Thor in that Thor Love and Thunder. They made him a shallow shell version of himself. Because for one, they wanted to show you what he was like without purpose, without having a means to strive towards anything. That was the first thing. And the second thing is because it was questioning the hierarchy of the gods. So if you begin to question, if you listen to what Gore was saying in the movie, and if you really think about it, and if you question what he was questioning, it's a very dangerous means of questioning that can lead one to a form of self-reflection that could cause one to open up their eyes a little bit. So they had to kill the story. They had to nerf that shit so bad that it was just such a bad movie nobody would really get it. So they layered it with a bunch of corny ass comedy, right? And they just put a lot of just stuff to nerf that concept because it was too heavy of a story. This is why DC movies don't do as well, because the public can't handle this type of depth in storytelling. Yo. They can't handle it. So when you put that type of depth, that type of darkness in the story, you're going to lose the masses. The whole multiverse saga wasn't even bad. Phase 4, 5, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. Most people just didn't fucking understand the story. They say Quantum Mania is real bad, but I think that's just Paul Judd and his corny ass comedy that they like to put on everything. But that shit was about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, bro. Like, they had Schrodinger's cat in that fucking shit. It was heavy as hell, bro. And I think that's the problem. It's the public is too slow to keep up. They can't keep up with shit. So all the good stories get nerfed, or they can't continue telling the stories because people can't follow the story. And it sucks for real creators, man, because, you know, people are really trying to tell great stories, and you can't get the stories out in fashion because people too stupid to follow the stories. So, you know, somebody like me, you know, I don't know, but, you know, I really rock with Wonder Man. I really thought it was a good show. It was just so coded. I have to really sit down and have a full conversation about it because it was coded as hell. I also feel like it was neurodivergent coded. Like, he gave all mad neurodivergent vibes to me. Because, bro, why are you obsessing over this one line so much, bro? But, you know, that's going to be coming soon. But in the meantime, I appreciate y'all for hopping on the live. Like I said, if you missed the beginning of it, be sure to check the post, because I will share the full post. But I appreciate y'all for hopping in for sure. Peace, y'all.